I look down the list of names, I remember most of your names, so I'm glad that you're still with us. And for those of you who are new, I'm Kathy Nelson from the University of Utah, and I'm in the Department of Special Education. And for the last few years, I have been stressing over stress research and looking into it a lot. And so it's a topic that I'm excited about, and I hope that you are by now too. And I think this session, this is our third session, and I think this one is the one that's is your reward for hanging with us, for hanging with all the physiology and all the research. We're finally going to look at what we can do to help mitigate some of those stressful situations and the toxic stress. Look, we're going to start out today just with a very quick review, and then we're going to talk about intervention. And in doing that, we're going to talk about intervention with children and youth, and we're going to talk about their behavioral state. We're going to talk about how to create an environment that's responsive. We're going to talk about communication, the importance of predictability, and how to create a predictable environment. Social relationships and attachment, and then we're going to look at families. We're going to look at a little bit of research on families and stress, and we're going to look at how we can intervene with them. And then lastly, and this really should be moved over a little bit, we're going to talk about your own stress and strategies that you might use to try to manage your own levels of stress. So I said, hopefully this will be your reward for hanging in there. So, by way of a review, the first one is looking at the magnitude of a stress response. It depends on the novelty, that we're much more stressed by a new stress than something that we're used to. If it's happened over and over and over again, we habituate to that stress and it's less threatening to us. The magnitude of the stress response depends on if it's unpredictable. There's a lot of research that we talked about a little bit that said if the stress is unpredictable, it's much more difficult for us to manage. They've done a lot of research on mice looking at this, and if the stressor comes at them randomly, they're much more stressed than if they can predict exactly when it's going to come. The threat to our person or ego, if we feel like it's going to hurt us physically or it's going to hurt our perception of ourselves or our ego. And then finally, a lack of control. If we sense that we have a lack of control, and again, looking at all the little rodent research, they've really looked at when rats can press a lever and get the reinforcer, they feel a reduction in their stress. And there is a reduction in their stress. So control, predictability matter. Then looking at factors that protect us against stress are the one, and we looked at lots and lots of research last time on secure attachment, having good physical health. If we are feeling well, if we're healthy, our stress levels are automatically mitigated. Having a strong social network, very, very important to us. Family and friends can create that emotional trust and relaxation. Even if we have a pet, it helps us. A responsive environment, an environment that provides opportunities for contingent learning, positive feedback on the child's ability to make changes in their lives, in their environments. Just that feeling that we're competent. Having clear patterns of arousal and relaxation, sleep and wake. Having opportunities for physical exercises, opportunities to relax. And then just our basic temperamental characteristics that we just come into the world with. So were there any questions on what we've covered in the past sessions? waiting a minute to see if there are any, but I'm not seeing any coming. I'm going to go ahead and again feel very free to ask your questions anytime, and I will really make an attempt to glance over to that screen, and I do forget to do it. I get kind of involved in what I'm saying over here, but I will make an attempt to do that. But if I don't do it, I will eventually see it, I promise. So there are two major ways that we can cope with stress. If resources are deemed adequate, if we have the resources that we need, we can either use problem-focused coping behavior, where we try to solve the problem, where we try to get rid of it in our life, or we can change how we view it, which is emotion-focused. And neither one of those is the one right answer. They're both right. It depends on the circumstances. There's some situations that we truly can solve. We can quit taking on certain tasks. We can go to bed earlier. We can get a babysitter and go out to dinner. You know, there's some things that we do have some control over, but sometimes we really don't. And we have to reframe it in our mind. It's just re-looking at that and saying, I mean, you might say something like, yeah, it could be worse. You know, so-and-so's troubles are way worse than mine. You reframe the situation. That may not be the most positive example in the world, but you reframe it so that you can deal with it as a stressful situation easier. So looking at our kids with disabilities and keeping those things in mind, the first thing I like to do, kind of from that problem-solving frame, is think about possible health issues first. We really have to, with our kids, some of them really have pretty crummy little bodies. They really are sick a lot of the time. They have tummy aches, they have headaches, they have neurological things going on. There really is a lot going on with them, and there's really no point in going on and doing a lot of other interventions if we can solve it at the health issue. We're really not going to relieve that stress until we get at that root. Now, obviously, you're going to have to reframe it if there's nothing that you can do about it. But I remember an example we had years and years and years ago. This was a child who was blind, and he wouldn't eat. I mean, he just wouldn't eat. He screamed, he yelled, he'd bite every time somebody tried to feed him, and they tried all kinds of different interventions with him. He even went to a couple doctors. They had a behavior team come in and look at him, and finally one day when he had his mouth full open screaming, somebody got a good look in there, and they found out that he just had horrible abscesses in his gums. His teeth were all decayed in the back, and he wouldn't eat because his teeth hurt. When they got that cleared up, the problem went away. So we could have done intervention till the cows came home, and he never would have gotten better. It really took thinking about the health issues. Then the next thing I like to look at is their sleep-wake cycles. If a child is not getting enough sleep, it's going to alter their stress responses. And we all know at times when you have a newborn baby, other times when you don't get enough sleep, how you perceive stress is so much higher. You're just on the edge. You're always ready just to drop off that little precipice into a stressful state. And so we really need to look at their sleep-wake. Are they getting enough sleep? Then look at their patterns of arousal and relaxation. Are they able to arouse enough to take in, to learn stimuli? And are they able to relax back down again, or are they staying keyed up in too high of a state? And those are called, we're looking at, the first thing is looking at that whole state intervention, biobehavioral state. And I think this is just kind of a very, very basic state. It tells us a child's level of arousal and alertness. And children who have impairments of the central nervous system often have a lot of difficulty moving smoothly between those states and just keeping control over them. You'll see kids, even kids with ADHD, for example, will switch very widely from state to state. They can seem very drowsy, and then all of a sudden they're active and running around again. They can go from a sleep state to one that's wide awake very, very quickly, and that's what a lot of our kids have a lot of problems controlling. Some of our kids remain in that drowsy sleep state for too long, and they really can't learn either. Children who have difficulty controlling, modulating their level of arousal may really become easily overstimulated or agitated. And if there's a lot going on around them, they're not able to move into a sleep state easily. And they really can't protect themselves from overload. They really get way too overloaded, which is very stressful. So as we look at, just kind of looking at the patterns of sleep that we all should move through, these states should move, and I know you can't see my hand moving, but think of like a bell curve here, with the bottom being the quiet sleep, and then the other end being, then the top of that being a crying, agitated sleep state, and then it reverses and goes back down to the quiet sleep again. So the first two states there are quiet sleep and active sleep. And they're actually those kind of, there's the quiet, that's our deep sleep, and then the active, there's the shallow, and then the REM, the rapid eye movement sleep. We should, those really three sleep states should alternate all through the night. We have kind of a 90-minute cycle that we go through, and those should be happening all through the night. And all of those sleep states are important for different reasons. We need all three of them. And if we don't get enough of them, then we'll be very tired the next day. Remember, we had a child once in the program who had Down syndrome, and he was in kindergarten, and it was really a really sweet, easygoing little guy, but he kept sleeping at school, and nobody could figure out what was going on. His mom kept saying, well, he sleeps a lot, he sleeps plenty. He's a good sleeper. He goes to sleep, he sleeps all night, we don't have a problem. Well, they finally put a sleep monitor on him at night, and what they found out was his oxygen levels were dipping all night long. And because of that, his body wasn't allowing him to go into a quiet sleep or that deep sleep period. And so the poor little guy just was tired. He wanted to sleep all day to try to make up for that again. What they have shown is during that we consolidate, there are just a ton of purposes for sleep. One of them is it kind of allows our brain, which is working obviously really hard all day, it allows it a little bit of downtime. It allows the brain to recharge its batteries. But it also allows for consolidation of memory. That this is when our memory is really consolidated, and it's consolidated during both of those periods. Kind of interestingly, is during our REM sleep, we consolidate more emotionally based memories, and then during a combination of the REM sleep and the quiet sleep is when more perceptual memories are integrated into our brain. And we truly, without those, we don't integrate our memories. And so I always tell my students it doesn't do any good to be up cramming all night for tests. All that's going to happen to you is you're going to sit there at the test and go blank because the memory really isn't consolidated into your brain. That we need to have sleep to do that. So those things are important. Then the next state we go through is obviously the drowsy sleep state, and hopefully, well, let's see, it's about 4:20 now, and those of you who have been teaching all day, I'm sure you know exactly how drowsy feels. The heavy-lidded just kind of are closing down. And then the next, then kind of coming up, if you think about that, coming up the curve again, the next one is a quiet alert state. And the quiet alert state is actually the best time for learning. That this is when all of our little processes are at the forefront taking in information. That we're still, we're quiet, and our brain is on go. It's taking in information. I always think, kind of if you could be a dog and have your ears stick up, that would happen in a quiet alert state. That's how we would know you're in it. But we see on children, you see just those kind of bright little eyes looking at us. Their whole attention is focused as they take in information. Then the active alert, and usually a quiet alert and an active alert state, again, we'll kind of flip back and forth. But active alert is when we're doing more body movements, we're moving around, we're shifting, and in some ways we're saying, I kind of need something different, I need a change here, and when I get that, I'll be ready to learn again. But we should alternate kind of back and forth between those two. So if you kind of think about how good teachers structure their classroom, we move between quiet activities, reflective activities where we're asking children to take in and process information, and active ones that get all their systems revved up and going. And we have to have those. After we've been sitting too long, it's like our brain kind of melts down into our feet. And in order to get up and going, it has to get physical. We have to be physically active. So then there's crying and agitated, and there's enough that goes on from a physiological standpoint that it's its own state. And you all know what that looks like. So you think that's the whole curve going up again, and then it should come back down in a smooth movement. That even though some of those states are alternating back and forth, basically we have a smooth curve. That we go through a drowsy state before we become alert. Okay, so what do we do about this? What do we do when we have a kid who isn't getting, they're just way too keyed up all day. They're just in those just keyed up transitional states. What do we do with them? And one of the things that I always like to think about is that the drowsy state and the active alert states are really good intervention states because the child's telling you, I could either go back to sleep now, I could either go into a lower state if I'm drowsy, or when I'm in that active alert, I'm telling you I need something different. That I'm either going to have to be calmed down in some way to get to a quiet sleep, or I'm going to have a change, or I'm going to start crying. So those are the times I like to intervene. I learned this early in my training in this area, and it just sticks with me. Variety awakens and repetition soothes. So when a child, we want to awaken them, we do lots of active things. If we're holding a baby, we'll shift him back and forth kind of vigorously. We use bright intonation. We move around a lot. We just use a lot of variety of different things. Bright colors in the environment. I give that variety. And then repetition soothes, the same thing over and over. Very calm, repetitious, soothing voice. Very calming colors. We're bringing down the amount of stimulation. Just looking at calming stimuli are ones that are just very low-key, very calm, kind of warm. And then if we want to bring them up, we give them more physical exercise. One of the things I always want to do with kids, too, is I found that sometimes kids with significant disabilities come to our classes so bundled up that you start, when you have to change their diapers or other reasons that we're undressing them, it's like peeling an onion. There's so many layers in there. We're peeling back layer after a layer of clothing until you get to this little child, however, is just a little sweat ball in there. And so those are the things that we want to look at. And then make sure we give them opportunities to relax. We don't want to have so much going on in our class that it's just stimulation, stimulation, stimulation. I often think in our early childhood, because of who we are as early childhood educators, we think of bright primary colors, and a lot of times the classrooms are just so overstimulating that you have a child with autism in there, and it's too much. That we really need to bring down that level of stimulation. Okay, are there any questions on behavioral state? So you've all seen we have kids who are real hyper alert and kids who are hypo. And that's where you think about that. Variety awakens, repetition soothes. I don't see any questions, so we'll move on. Moving on, now we're kind of looking at what can we do with our environment now that we've looked at the child's physical health, we looked at their behavioral state. How can we help lower their stress levels? The kind of basic things of having a responsive environment is so, so important. That we want to make sure, I'm going to skip down to the second one here first, is make sure that the child, I like to say, a doer, not a doner, that the child is an active participant in the environment, that he's not just having things done to him, that he's doing is really, really important for just many, many reasons. We want to make sure we're avoiding that good fairy syndrome where things just happen. Things come, things go, I don't know, I can't control it. When you think about kids with severe disabilities, that's the way a lot of their lives are. Things come onto their tray, things go away again, and they don't have to do anything about it. They don't have to control that. They'll just come and they'll go away again, and oh well, if I sit here long enough, it'll happen. These kids aren't doers. They're having things done. And in order to make sure that we're avoiding that good fairy syndrome, I like to make sure I involve them in all phases of the activity. So that's getting their materials out, getting them out of their cubby, getting them out of wherever they were. And I don't care if a child's in a wheelchair. We want to take them over there to where the materials are, in some way help them get them out, in some way prepare for that activity so that the materials aren't just appearing. They're not just suddenly on their tray. They're not just suddenly on their desk or their table in front of them. That they help to get them out. And in doing that, you'll really help them to learn object permanence. They'll learn numerous skills, but they'll also be able to anticipate what's going to happen in the activity. And make sure they're actively a part of the activity, that it's not just being done to them, that it's not that hand-over-hand manipulation that I talked about in my research study, that it's not taking a child's hand and coloring for them, that they're actually actively involved, that their muscles are moving doing it, that it's not just our muscles doing it. And then they got to be involved in putting the materials away again. And knowing concretely that it's over and done, we're putting the activities away, this is where the materials went to. They didn't just suddenly leave my tray, that I can have some control over that. I can put them in a box that says finished. I can put them back in the cubby. I'm a part of that ending of the activity, and I know that that means that now another activity is coming up. So being involved in all of those phases is kind of a natural calendar system in and of itself. It tells the child that anticipation information. It tells them that it's done. And then just pause frequently. Don't move too quickly. We always want to encourage our children to be independent. Don't move too quickly. Give them a chance. And that's one of those things that it sounds like, well, of course we do that. But I know in my own practice I don't. I mean, I know that just when I ask you if you have any questions, to sit on my hands and wait to see if you have any questions is really difficult. And here, I'm having to give you the opportunity to type things in. With our kids, we're asking them to put together information that is not real readily available to them if they have sensory impairments, if they have motor impairments, if they have cognitive challenges. It's not going to come as rapidly as we would like to think it is. But that doesn't mean that they won't get there given time. But we have to give them time. Give them time to be independent. And then make sure that we're giving them choices. Again, that amount of control is so important. Kids need to have appropriate control. And that goes to the next one, that people always will say, well, we just can't give them control all day long. They can't always have a choice. There's some things that they need to do. My rule of thumb in there is give them the same amount of control that a child without disabilities has. And when you think about it, that's far from control all day long. But it's a whole lot more control than a lot of kids with disabilities have. And that whole control issue, it is always kind of a double-edged sword, is we don't want them to have to control for things that they can't control for either. We don't want to make them feel responsible for things that they can't control. So we want to make sure that we're structuring our activities for success, that we really have things planned that they can have control and they can be successful. That we don't want to say, well, we're trying to give them control and independence, and then they end up failing. That we want to make sure that we've broken those activities down into very small steps so that they can actually succeed as they go. That we structure for success. Pause, and when I pause here, I'm kind of looking over there to see if there are any questions. So again, feel free to jump in and type those questions. I'm trying to practice what I preach, which isn't always easy for me. The next thing is we want to make sure that we're really having an environment that's responsive and it's communication rich. Communication, as we will see in the video we're going to look at, is really important. And in order to do it, we have to make sure the environment's nurturing. We don't communicate real readily if it's not a nurturing environment. If we're in a 200-person lecture hall, for me, there's no way in the world I'm going to raise my hand and ask a question. That isn't a nurturing environment for me. But when I'm with a group of my friends or with people I know, I feel safe enough to ask questions. I feel safe enough to communicate. So it has to be a warm, nurturing environment for communication to take place. And we have to have relationships. We communicate much more readily when we feel we have a relationship. You know, even just knowing, seeing your familiar names and knowing what your comments have been in the past, however small, we have a little bit of a relationship now, and it makes a difference in how we communicate. We've got to be really sensitive to all of the child's communications, and a lot of our kids, unfortunately, have communications that aren't real easily readable, and they have little subtle nuances. There can be really difficult, very subtle communications. Our task is to make sure that we're really sensitive to all of them, that we really respond, that we read them. I've worked a lot with Dr. Jan van Dijk from the Netherlands, who does a lot of work in the area of deafblind, and he does a lot of, he calls them life assessments, but he means live assessments of kids. And he is so good at just totally leaving his world and going into their world. He just, it's a total focus of his attention on all of their communications. He just is in the moment, in their moment, all of the time. He's just so sensitive to everything that they might be telling them. And in doing that, he gives them opportunities and motivations to communicate. We really want to make sure that our children have a reason to communicate. It goes back to if everything is done for them, they don't have to communicate. They have no reason. If it's the good fairy syndrome, they don't even know the power of communication. Why would I communicate? Things just happen. I don't know that when I communicate, it's going to lead to anything. So we have to make sure there are opportunities. We have to make sure there's spaces. We have to make sure that we're giving them those opportunities to communicate. And we have to make sure that those opportunities occur throughout the day. And again, this goes back to Dr. Van Dijk. He integrates conversations. It's a conversation approach that you're going back and forth. And conversations are much more than words. And they don't have to involve words. That we can converse through our body movement all day long. So those communications that go beyond words that we need to respond to are what we call non-symbolic communications. And those non-symbolic, they're also called pre-symbolic. I kind of like non-symbolic because a lot of our children really don't move beyond that stage. So non-symbolic communications, you see, sometimes very subtle with kids who can't do much else. It'll be movements, changes in muscle tone. You feel the tension. You feel that, just that change in the muscle tone. You feel them relaxing again. That may be about all the communication a child can physically do. They may vocalize. The groaning, the grunts, the crying are vocalizations. Their facial expressions are their communication. Orientation is that turning to, turning away. Their body posture, leaning in towards a person, pulling away again. Pausing. We naturally pause when we're waiting for a response from someone. We pause to let them know, my turn, your turn. touching, manipulating, moving with another person. These are non-symbolic communications. These are acting on objects, using objects to interact with each other. Something even like tapping a pencil on a desk to indicate that we're bored. You can hear, maybe you can hear tap, tap, tap. Assuming positions and going places are those non-symbolic communications. Conventional, also assuming positions and going places might be like going over to the drinking fountain to say, I want a drink. A child might go to the door to say, I want to leave. Going to where the food's kept to say, I'm hungry. Conventional gestures are the things like shaking their head, no, nodding yes, motioning with your fingers to say, come here. Like I really realized the limitations of not being able to have you all see me when we're talking about non-symbolic communications. I realize how much of this is just gestural that I'm sitting here doing through my gestures that you can't see. And indeed, most of our behavior, about 80% of our communications, rather, are these non-symbolic things. So, I really struggle when I'm not able to communicate with you in these ways, that it really is difficult. But those conventional gestures are just those that aren't things that necessarily come naturally, but they're things that we've assigned meaning to, but they're not at a symbolic level like words or sign language yet. Depictive actions are when we start pantomiming things out that we want. Withdrawal is a communication, that just withdrawing from a situation, that turning off. That you see, you'll see it in our kids. You'll see that physical, just all of a sudden, that blank look in them. That you see they've just vacated their body on you. They're still sitting there, but there is nobody in there anymore. They have withdrawn, and that's their communication. It's their communication that I just got totally overwhelmed here. And then aggressive or self-injurious behaviors are communications. Those are very, very powerful communications. The old adage is that behavior is communication, and it's absolutely true. I take that back. In all of my time being a teacher, being a consultant, I've only had one child that I'm not sure was a communicator. Every other child, I don't care how significant their disabilities, how severe their disabilities were, they communicated. They used one or more of those communications that we talk about. I had one child once who I went in and she was just lying on a mat and, with her eyes closed. And they just kind of left me with her. And then they came back and said, well, what do you think? And they said, well, I'm just waiting for her to wake up. And they said, oh, she doesn't wake up. She's in a coma. And that was my one that I'm not real sure of, that she truly was. She was in a coma, and I'm not sure that she was communicating. But every other child, hundreds of kids, have all been communicators. Okay, I want to show you, this is a video tube from YouTube, and so this is where you're going to click on it, and the video is of Bob Shoemaker. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's going to be talking about resilience and the importance of communication and social support. And this is from a PBS series, This Emotional Life. And so I want you to kind of watch it. Think about communication and think about social support. And then when you're done watching it, if you could do the raise your hand thing, click on the raise your hand, then I can know that everybody is through watching it. There's a little advertisement that starts at the beginning of that, and you will see that you have to watch like a few seconds of that, and then you can click it on. And just as a disclaimer, I don't even know what they're going to be advertising. They're random, and we're not endorsing any of it, but the video is worth whatever it is. So if you want to go ahead and click on that video and watch it, and then again, raise your hand after you've seen it. Hey, I'm hoping that most of you have seen the video by now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. But what I want you to do, I'm going to answer a couple of questions that came in, but I also want you to have a few minutes to reflect on that video because I think it's just so powerful. And if you want to just type in kind of what your feelings were as you watched that, how that might relate to your class, to the kids that you work with. And then the questions is, can you give me an example or two of depictive actions? Depictive actions would be something like holding your head to say, I have a headache, holding your stomach to say, I have a stomach ache, or, let's see, and always kind of putting your head down to say, I want to go to sleep, that you're acting them out. It's almost like you're playing a game of charades, that you're doing all those things without words. And it's what we tend to do naturally when we're talking to someone who doesn't speak English. But that I do, you start using all your gestures and acting things out more. So self-injury is a frightening form of communication. Will you be talking about techniques to turn it into a higher level? Yeah, in fact, I'll come back to that in just a minute. I think that's a really good topic for this. Here's another depictive action using Mr. Potato Man pointing to an ear to show he's got an owie that you can use, and that would be an object acting on one another. Is you can use a lot of things with dolls to show things too. Good. Let's go ahead. Any reactions to the video? And then I will get back to the self-injury. But one of the things I think that video points out so clearly to us is that we are social beings. Humans are compulsive communicators. We have to have that social interaction. We are seeking it. And with our kids, we have to develop a little tap code with them. We got to make that connection, that we are always seeking connections. We don't want to be isolated. We don't want to be alone. We need communication, and our kids are no different. And they just need that tap code. We got to figure out a way to get to that tap code. I also want to, and I think most of you are in Idaho or Washington, and this is from just kind of give you a taste at Big City, Salt Lake. I'm going to read to you out of Salt Lake Magazine, and so you know that it's the gospel truth. And if you get nothing else out of this workshop, you can say, I improved your love life. This is from Single in the City, and it's an inside look at Utah's dating scene. And these are the rules of attraction. Nonverbal cues speak volumes as to whether that special someone is into you. Move number 198, the reach. When his or her hand is reaching out towards the other person rather than resting at their side, that can be a first sign of interest. Move number 284, the mimic, is a common site of interest that involves matching and mirroring, such as when your date duplicates your gestures, voice inflection, and manner of speaking. Move number 23 is the blink. We all know someone is interested when they give you full eye contact. They're definitely into you if they blink frequently. Experts say when someone is highly attracted to another person, they'll naturally get nervous and blink more often. And move number 67 is the distance. Part of interpreting body language is not only what someone is doing with their body, but how closely they're doing it. When that personal space bubble somewhere between rubbing elbows and about 1.5 feet disappears, it's a sure sign that that person enjoys being close to you. So there you have it. You can go home and get real close to people and blink frequently. And don't blame me if it goes wrong. So kind of back kind of on the serious note of those aggressive self-injurious behaviors, which a lot of times are saying they're not into you and they're not into what's happening. What do we do about them? And they are tough. I think those self-injurious behaviors are almost the hardest to get rid of. And one of the things we talked a little bit about last time, if you were here for the research presentation, is that one of the theories behind self-injurious behaviors is that one of the hormones that is released by cortisol, that cortisol causes to be released, is dopamine. And that's why when you're stressed, you don't feel pain. When you're like, I'm not talking about a little bit of stress, but I'm talking about like when you get into a traffic accident and you're bleeding all over the place, you're not going to remember feeling pain at that moment. It's because you've had a huge release of dopamine in your body. And dopamine obviously is an opiate. It's a painkiller. It produces a sense of euphoria, of well-being, even though you're not well. And so they think that kids may be doing that behavior to get at that. They might be doing the behavior to get the release of dopamine. But unfortunately, there's also an addictive side to that, so they have to do more and more behaviors to get a bigger and bigger rush of that dopamine, if that makes sense. I'm not sure it does. I mean, an example now, just outside of kids with disability, is the teenagers who are cutters or other, I think primarily it's females who tend to be cutters, who will cut themselves to actually get that rush of dopamine. And so that's one of the factors playing into self-injury, and that makes it a pretty tough thing to mitigate, to do something about. That actually aggressive behaviors are usually a lot easier to deal with than the self-injurious behaviors. But I do look at it, and again, the research shows us that kids give us lots of warning signs before they get to that point. So I like to direct my intervention, again, to all those little non-symbolic, more subtle warning communications that the child is giving us. That's where I want to intervene with them. When you think about, in my research study with little Alec, he had lots of self-injurious behaviors. When we could make the activities meaningful and predictable, and we read his communication, those really went down to very, very minimal. Once he started doing them, it was much more difficult. But if we can intervene in the smaller parts of it, then I think we can do a lot more. But that's the time to intervene, is before the child really starts into the self-injurious behaviors. Once you're into that cycle, it's pretty tough. And this is, Cutters, I knew a student, and she talked about how she felt still has it, and it's escalated, and it's not a deafblind child. Yeah. I mean, cutting it's become almost epidemic now. It's because of that euphoria. I mean, there's a couple of them that people will do, unfortunately, that can have really nasty consequences. And it's one of those hormones that's released as a byproduct of cortisol. So here we have it. It can lead all the way. So good. I'm really glad that you brought up the whole issue of self-injurious behavior. Comment. This is one of the reasons, yeah, great comment. I love working with a good group of coworkers. They can help me see those precursors. They've seen something I didn't and know what to look for next time and plan ahead. That is so important. That's such a good comment, and that's really what a good team should be doing, is watching those. And again, our kids aren't necessarily great communicators. You know, they're communicators, but they're pretty tough to read. They are really hard, and you really have to watch them all the time and see all those little behaviors. And if you can respond to those little ones, you can save yourself a whole lot of heartache down the road. That can really be your important key point. Excellent. You guys, like I said, I'm really beginning to feel like I know you all. It's really weird. My next little bit, and you like my little, I just put up my little penguin there for you all to admire. But I think we've kind of have spent the question time. And again, I'm going to look over there if you have any. So there's several different things. As Bob Shoemaker pointed out, one of the things that's really important to us is to have social relationships. Another thing, and this also goes back to the self-injurious behaviors, and I don't have this on a slide, so you might have to kind of scribble a note, but one of the things they found that's really important in stress relief is to have an outlet for it. That Robert Sapolsky, that I've been reading a lot of his stuff lately, talks about if a rat can go over when it's stressed and go gnaw on something, his cortisol levels will go down. It's one of the things, like when we go eat, our stress levels will go down. When you punch a wall, it gives you an outlet for your stress. So we're looking at outlets. We're looking at having a way to get rid of the outlets, giving our kids an outlet for it may be physical exercise. There could be a variety of outlets, but trying to make sure that they have an outlet other than beating on themselves or gouging at their eyes. That they have an outlet that's a little bit more productive for them. And one of those outlets is having a good social relationship. If it isn't, and this is another thing from Robert Sapolsky, is that they found that and he does a lot of research with baboons, that when the baboons are stressed, that they will turn around and wallop on the baboon next to them, unless it's a baboon that they have a good social relationship with. And so, building those connections between our kids, making sure that they have positive social relationships, so they're not doing that kind of redirected aggression. Every time they're stressed, they're not turning around and hitting. They're turning around to a person for support. And then the next thing, which goes to our slides now, is having a predictable environment. That we are less stressed if we can predict what's going to happen in our life. It's when things just happen randomly to us that we get really, really stressed. If we know what it is, if we can predict it, our stress goes down, even though we may not be able to control it, but we can predict it. We want to make sure in this that we're giving our kids lots of ways to understand what's going to happen. It can't just be telling them. With our kids, they may need to have a visual representation. They may need to see an actual object. It may be helping them perform part of a task. We need to tell them, we need to just give them multiple ways to know what's happening. We have to use lots of cues. And, I used to always say, but be sure to use the cues immediately before the activity starts. And that actually isn't really true, as I've read all the stress research, that it's like, oh, I need to reframe that whole thing, is you want to use it not lots of months before, like it doesn't do any good to say, in the next 2 years, you're going to be taking a quiz. That's not going to be real helpful. Or to say, sometime next month, we're going to be mailing out a quiz to you. Get ready for it. But on the other hand, if we give it too immediately, it doesn't give the kids or ourselves enough time to prepare for it. That you have to give them time to process that information, to think what that cue means, and then put into place a coping strategy. That we can't just rush them through it. And I've seen that happen a lot, that people give them the cue and then boom, 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 they're just moving, moving, moving. And that's not going to help the child lower their stress. But you've got to give them time to process. You've got to give them time to figure out, how am I going to cope with it? What am I going to do to help myself be in control of the situation? Because otherwise it's useless information. That's what the prediction is all about, is trying to figure out what you're going to do about it. Having a coping mechanism in place. We just had, I don't know if you all did, you probably do it in Idaho too, but we just had like our big shakeout day, the earthquake drill thing. And so they are giving us a coping strategy of sorts. I'm not sure that my little desk is really going to protect me. I'm not sure I bought into that yet. But it is a coping strategy should that happen. And again, one of the frightening things about earthquakes is that unpredictability. The other thing is consistent routines, that having things unfold in basically the same ways all of the time. To be able to know this is how my day is going to unfold, and I'm not going to be hit with a million surprises. I never would have made a substitute teacher. I just couldn't have had that unpredictability in my life. I have to know. I have my day kind of mapped out in my brain of what I'm going to do and what's going to happen when, and I can have my own little mini meltdowns if things don't happen. And that said, that's always one of the dangers, is that we can get our kids too routinized, that it happens every day the same way, and this is the way they do it, and then the one time that we do have a fire drill, an earthquake drill, whatever it is, it throws everything all out of whack, and the child has a major meltdown. So you need to have consistent routines, but also build in a few surprises, a few unexpected events, so they don't get too used to doing just one routine. Good. Here somebody says, we do a lot of what we call pre-teaching what an activity that's going to happen. Yes, that isn't part of the normal daily routine. Excellent. Is pre-teaching that. Giving him practice, letting him know the social stories can be a way to tell a child what's going to happen. That this is something that's going to happen out of place. Here it is. So they can build that in. And through that, they learn those coping strategies. They learn to get themselves set. Okay, there's going to be something different. I'm going to have to take a chill powder here. I'm going to have to do whatever I do to bring my stress down. Right? And another way to do it, calendaring or schedule systems are really, really useful in helping kids. And these can look a million different ways. With kids who have visual impairments who are deafblind, we tend to use real objects from the activities or tactile representations, but they can also be picture schedules, they can be words, they can look a lot of different ways. You saw one example of it if you saw my research study with a child in PE. And that can help, and I'm going to show you, we're going to see a video too. When you're looking at repetition, think repetition of the same sequence of events in the same manner. So the child can really anticipate next step, what's going to happen next. And that actually increases growth of neural pathways, which actually determines the size of the brain, or all those neural pathways. So as the child learns that this event's connected to this event, it becomes a little pathway in the brain that lets them know that this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. And that develops those little neuronal systems within the brain and makes the child feel secure. It's a security for them to have that routine, and we all feel that way. We're safe in our own little routine, and yeah, I don't want to just have it that way all the time, but I couldn't handle every day different. I can handle some days, but I want to know, I want to know what those days are going to be too. I want to know, I can handle it when I'm going on a trip on Friday, and I know that that's going to be different. It's a place I haven't been to, and I'm going to be seeing new different things. But I've got a lot of warning to it, and I can get myself set for that. That, yeah, it's not going to be in my own little home routine, but it is going to be, it's something I can predict. Okay, so what I want you to watch now, this is Kirill. And as we look at Kirill, you're going to see a lot of the things that we've talked about. Kirill, this was one of the kids several years ago now. I went to Russia, and the purpose of my visit to Russia, we went to their school for children who are deaf and blind, and we were looking specifically at kids with challenging behaviors, and we were doing a project with the parents the school teachers in this particular project to reduce the kids' stress. And Kirill was one of those students, and you will see that he has got some major, major things going on. Kirill has fetal alcohol syndrome, a severe hearing loss, very low vision. He had been left on the doorstep of an orphanage, and he had reactive attachment disorder. He had been basically shuttled from institution to institution. So what you're going to see, we're going to look at 3 videos of Kirill, and you're going to see the first video is really almost painful to watch, and I got to tell you, you're going to hear screaming, just so you have the predictive information to kind of get yourself braced. This is a very, very stressed, very unhappy child, and watching it is somewhat stressful, but it's also rather short. It even upsets my cat when I play it. So let's go ahead and watch Kirill. Myself unmuted here. Like I said, that is not an easy video to watch. That the blue vest type thing that he has on is actually an adapted version of a straitjacket, basically. And, this was a tough kid. He was a really, really hard kid. And they did a wonderful job with Kirill at the school. What I want to do now is we're going to show two more videos. And as you watch these, I want you to really watch his teacher. Watch the things that you think that she does well with him. See what you think she's doing to actually bring down that level of stress with him. You can also look at areas you think maybe could have been done better, but particularly focus on the things that she does well and how he reacts to them.
Смотри. Сам. И второй. Смотри. Поправь. 5, 6, 7. Возьми.
Uh-oh. Hopefully this one will come through. Let's watch another one, and I'm hoping I see somebody's not getting it, but I know Ben will respond to that. So let's go ahead and watch the next one, and then you can combine what you learn about what this particular teacher does and then comment on them. And you can just go ahead and tape in as you're watching, too. So go ahead and show the other one, and hopefully maybe you're watching it well.
Смотри.
Смотри. Солнышко. Пойдем. Пойдем. Будем рисовать с тобой. Солнышко. Возьми карточку, сядь за стол. Положи ее. И сядь. Красиво. Тетя Ира. Вот у нас карточка. Вот какую ты карточку хочешь. Вот. Ты хочешь магнитофон, чтобы я включил. Хорошо. Теперь сядь. Смотри. Смотри. Солнце. Смотри. Солнце. Сожми. Солнце. Тетя Ира будет рисовать. Смотри. Краска. Смотри. Лучики. Смотри. Солнце. А теперь Кирилл сам. Кирилл, возьми пальчик, макни в краску. Рисуй. Так. А теперь лучики. Лучики будем рисовать. Макни в краску. Сам. Сам. Раз, молодец. Еще. Сам. Хорошо. Сам. Хорошо. Еще макни. Так. Много красавчиков. Давай рисуем лучик. Раз. Молодец. Еще. Надо встать, а то так нам с тобой неудобно. Встань. Оп. Рисуй. Хорошо. Сам еще. Сам. Молодец. Хорошо. Еще давай макнем. Вот здесь, с этой стороны рисуй. Так, хорошо, молодец. Теперь вот здесь. Рисуй. Как хорошо. С этой стороны. Вот как хорошо. Еще. Вот хорошо. А теперь давай пальчик я тебе вытру.
It takes me a minute to unmute here. So that gave you a way to brush up on your Russian, if nothing else. But it kind of shows you, for one thing, that it doesn't matter what language she was spoken. We could really understand what she was doing because of techniques that she used. So what do you all think? What are some of the things she used, and how might you use those in your class, or how do you use them? About what did she do well with him? Yeah, awesome. She didn't over-talk except when it was necessary. Yeah, she only talked. And again, we didn't even need to understand her Russian. And then she turned on the music. Yes, the music was very soothing to him. And did you notice that she had the little picture symbol for the music? She gave him information about what was coming up, what was happening. She talked in a soothing tone. She's so calm. Somebody said this down here, too, that she presented in a calm manner. Everything was very calm. Even when there was one time when there was another child doing something, and she just calmly went over there, calmly came back. And that really helped him, as those little neurons in the brain, the mirror neurons, reflect back her calm emotion. If we're calm, then the child is going to be more calm. Getting his attention elsewhere, good. Calming music, she used touch cues. She didn't just grab him and move him from place to place. She touched him to tell him that she was going to help him move, that she gave him just a light tap without just grabbing and moving him. And you could see, even at that, you could see an initial resistance. You could see that there could be a tipping point. If she hadn't done that, he could have gone the other direction. Right? Low tone, she moved very slowly. Yes, and this is a good one too, that she did the least amount of prompting necessary. She was fading back her prompts all the time, that she was always moving backwards. She really had that activity structured for success. She allowed him just to watch it at first, and then she supported him to do it, and then she let him do it more independently, and she faded that support back till she was basically just touching his elbow with it. There's another one where she just lets him totally go to town on it. Yeah, and she did do some hand over hand, and maybe she didn't have to do quite as much of that as she had to, but she did do it. She had a very, very light touch on him, that it was more of a hand underhand, where she was supporting him from the palm and the wrist, that she was giving him less guidance than she has to. Good. So she gave him the opportunity to do it. Yeah, and she showed a wonderful example of modeling, prompting, and fading prompts quickly. Yep, getting in, doing them, and getting out. Yes, instructional assistants tend to fade prompts way too slowly. And I think the one thing that I've seen in my career is their hand-over-hand manipulation of kids is the most addictive thing in the world. That once you start doing that hand-over-hand prompting, it is so hard to stop doing. I think mostly because it's just terribly efficient, that we prompt and prompt and prompt, and we move our kids through the whole activity of the day, and by the end of the day, they've produced a fabulous piece of art that was really our piece of art, and they haven't done anything, but to us it felt successful. So it's really addictive. I mean, I watch people just struggle. You tell them, fade them back, and it's hard. It's a tough thing. Right? She patiently waited for him to do it. She gave him that time to actually do it himself. Excellent. When she did touch his hand, and later I saw him touch her hand to move to the table. Yeah, so he communicated to her what he wanted her to do. And that tells me her response is consistent, and he knows what to anticipate. Excellent. That's so perceptive of knowing what to do, how to make that happen. The other thing, I think her use of the picture symbols, her use of a schedule system to build in that predictability. She gave him the symbol, and she gave him a little bit of time to process and think about it. Good. Are there any things that you think about when in your classroom that you see that you could use or that you already use from that? But even though this is Russia, and it's really quite a different system in a lot of ways, but there are also a lot of similarities. A few minutes to type if you have any. I think the issue of waiting is so huge no matter what class we're in. It's always huge even when I think I'm going slowly. Oh, yeah. Like I said, I just have to sit on my hands. I count to 5 in my head all the time with kids, that we move so quickly. We are so used to moving fast in our fast-paced life. We just want to move on. We want to get done. We're always in a hurry. We just want to move, and that doesn't work for most of our kids. That they really need this very, very slow pace. That was a fairly long video to do one little activity, that she had to be very patient, very slow, very calm. And I think the issue of waiting is it's one of the things that doesn't necessarily come easily to us. It doesn't fit with our general interaction styles. Any other little comments on things that you see in your class that you might be using? Some of the children who need extra time to respond, the teacher will ask, do you want me to come back to you? And I think that's great. I mean, I have been in that same experience that somebody will ask me a question and you're like, I don't know, I wasn't expecting to be called on right here and now, but if they say, do you want me to come back to you, then I can formulate a response. Then I can think about it and do it. But it might take me a minute or two. For all of us, we do that. We started using the calendar system today and hoping it will be successful. Excellent. And learning to be consistent. Yeah. And you could see in this that consistency, as Kathy said, that he obviously knew a routine. He knew a drill. This was consistent. It was predictable for him. having videos like this, or I always want to respond because I've read ahead. Having videos like this or modeling how to fade these prompts, our kids can participate. And I think video examples are really powerful. Watching someone fade those prompts out so beautifully. What was done to provoke his anger? Really, no. At that point, he was very new to the school. He had only been there 3 days on the first video, and that was pretty much the way he was all the time. I think it was partly in reaction to just being shuttled from place to place, but he had been shuttled from place to place because his behavior was like that. The second video was really only 2 to 3 weeks into his stay at the school. So, he made a lot of progress in a short time, but the first was just very typical of the way he was. He was also very violent towards the other kids. There was some video footage of him just clocking another kid, which isn't real easy to watch either, and then he would end up having just incredible meltdowns, and that was prompting the little tying his hands down vest thing, and then they had untied him for that video. But he was a pretty out of control kid. He was really, that was just the way he was the whole time that I saw him, those first days. He was pretty upset. Oh, it's so good. Okay, let me come back to them. One of the things that we saw that you mentioned that you've started doing, which is fabulous, Christine, is scheduled systems or calendar boxes, and these are basically objects or pictures that represent activities of the day, or I'm going to show you an example. They can represent items or activities within an activity, so they can be both. They provide children with a visual, textual method to know what is coming up. And they can also be, to go back to that in the Netherlands particularly, they'll have long schedules. The kids, a lot of them are in a residential school, and they'll have calendar systems that represent months, that represent the time until they're going to go home for a vacation. So they don't have to just be day schedules. They can represent how many days to vacation. They can represent longer periods of time. But basically, they're giving kids a way to know what's coming. They give them time to assimilate that information, to look at it, to look at the sequence and see how it's going to unfold so they can prepare themselves for what's coming, that they can get in place a strategy, a way to cope with what might be stressful to them. And then it gives them order, it gives them that predictability. One of the things you want to do is make sure that you review those symbols and systems during the day. These are a powerful communication time. They're a time when you can have a conversation with a child. They're a time when you can talk about what the child's done. You think about what we have conversations about. We converse about what we've done. We converse about what we're going to do. The calendars give us a way to do that for a child who may not understand our words, and we don't understand what he's saying symbolically, that it gives us a way to understand what the other's saying because we have that representation. We have a way to see that and know what it is. So these could be really, really powerful, and I'm so glad they're being used. They actually came out of the field of deaf blindness, and now they're being used extensively with kids with autism. And they are just a very, very powerful, good tool. These are, again, from Russia. Russia, I'll show you they can be done anywhere. And these, again, were the School for Their Deaf Blind. So you can see with this child, this was a child who had color vision, and so they just used colors to represent the different activities of a day. This was a child who could read words, and so his schedule was represented by words in enlarged print. This one, they used pictures. So they can be multiple different ways, and we're going to see some more examples too. And then this is just an example of how you can do a routine within an activity as well. So here you see this is another child who had better color vision than they did, they could see objects. So they represented the different routines within an activity by colors. So grooming activities were represented in green. And then these were feeding activities or activities centered around eating were represented by blue. But you can see that they're objects that represent the unfolding of a routine. So there are lots of different ways to look at schedule systems. We think one of the things you want to think about with a schedule system is where you're going to be using it. But sometimes we end up with these gigantic systems, and then we go on a field trip and we're trying to figure out a way how to make that portable. So you want to kind of think portability from the beginning in that system, where it's going to be used, how you're going to actually do it. I've seen them, I mean, it's just done a million different ways. One that I saw recently was actually the inside flap of a backpack had the objects that represented different things they were going to do, and they used parts of objects rather than the whole object. This is another video from Russia, and this is Masha Mariana in English. Masha had very little of either hearing or vision, and we're going to again see the painful pre-video, and so you can turn down your computers a little while just for this because it is a little tough to see, but let's go ahead and watch Mariana, and then we'll turn around and see another one. So let's start with that one.
Сейчас давай садись. Встань, встань, встань. Возьми стул. Садись. Садись. Играй. Все.
Remember to unmute myself. So you can see they've already got some good things going with Masha, that there's some things happening, but she really doesn't understand all of their signs, all of their cues, that she doesn't know what's coming up, and she doesn't really like it either. I mean, you saw her reaction when she got to that. She flat out didn't like it. So now we're going to watch another video, and this is Masha in a greenhouse. The school had a greenhouse, and she very clearly likes it. But watch all the ways they give her information. Yeah, and Kathy said the signing was too fast in that one. They signed really quickly, and I don't think she understood it. But she just, and they didn't give her time. They signed, and then they moved on. That was a really good example of not enough time provided. that she didn't get it and she was still stressed, that even though they gave her the information, she wasn't really able to access it or process it. So the next one is Masha in the greenhouse, and watch all the ways they give her information about what she's going to do and the task at hand.
Смотри. Так, это совок. Маша будет насыпать землю. Иди. Смотри. Тут ящик и тут. Это совок. Работай. Молодец, Маш, давай здесь. Возьми. Насыпай. Так. Все, смотри. Много. Так. Маша будет сажать цветок. Смотри. Возьми. Возьми. Давай.
Okay, so looking at that, we talked about, and I'm hoping I looked over at my thing and I thought, well, maybe I was on mute the whole time, that other thing. So I'm really not sure if I was or not, so I may repeat just a little of what I said the first time. But if you looked at that first video, one of the things that Kathy typed in was the signing was too fast, that she really couldn't access it at all. And then you could see in the second video that it was much slower, that she moved through the signing in a much slower way, that first video, if you want to just type in a few things that you thought upset her in the first video. Right, touching by an adult that meant nothing to her. She was reaching out to find out if there was someone there. She felt very insecure that where are they? Where, she didn't even know. That this was a girl who really had no vision. She couldn't see. She didn't know if they were there, where they were. Town movement, no touch, just way too much information that was given to her. She just really didn't know what they were saying. It was way beyond her level of comprehension. It was too fast. She was being pushed without the understanding what the expectation was. And she didn't know what she was supposed to do. So that led to that stress response that we saw. That led to that very unhappy scream. If she didn't know the expectations. What am I supposed to do? The signing was way too fast in the first video, and if she didn't really like the activity, and I think that maybe was part of it too, she just flat out, you saw her reaction that when she was given that activity, she was angry. She didn't like it. These things were new. It was just all too much. I don't have any research to prove this, but my experience is if I'm at the level of the student, I function as a partner, not the person in authority, and I treat the person with more respect and I slow down. I think that's such a powerful point, and that's something I think we all have to kind of remember all the time, is that when we're the one in power, when we're the one in control, that we're doing to kids, and when they're partners, with our friends, we're not doners. We don't just do things. We do have that more give and take, and you didn't see that in the first one. Excellent. What about the second video? What did you think was good in the second video? Right? Her standing during the greenhouse may have helped her to have a stronger connection, just giving her that proprioceptive information. I'd never thought of that, but that may be very true with her. It kind of anchored her to the world at that time. That's a new one that I had never thought of. She enjoyed and understood the activity. Now, she knew what she was going to do. She liked it. You saw her smile. And it's a very pleasant, meaningful activity. Gardening never personally does it for me. I wish it did. But it is one of those times that kids like it. It's playing with the dirt. It's that connectedness. It smells good. She got all of that information. She just clearly enjoyed it. Pre-teaching of vocabulary. Yeah, she obviously knew the vocabulary. She knew shoveling. She knew her little object system that she had, that she could feel it. Great communication through touch. They were signing through her touch, and they communicated a million other ways too. Teacher was more patient, very patient, very secure, let her do everything. She prepped her by touching her example in the book and then helped her to proceed through the activity. And she knew at each step what the expectations were. She knew how much dirt she was going to have to be shoveling in. She knew she wasn't going to be there all day doing it. She knew exactly what the requirements of that activity were. Excellent. I just took a glance over at the time and just about died. So I'm going to kind of move a little bit quicker. I'm really sorry. Social relationships, I never thought I'd fill up this much time. We've talked a lot about the importance of social relationships, having kids, assisting them to develop relationships with others, planning for times when the adult's not available, like you saw in my research. Help them to establish secure attachment with their caregivers. I'm going to skip that one. And get on to parents quickly. Studies have shown that parents of children with disabilities have significantly higher levels of parental stress. They just do. The stress increases when there's a mismatch between the stressor and their ability to cope. When they perceive that their child is difficult, when they perceive that they're hard, it's going to be more stressful to them. Parents have also reported that the most stressful time of their life is when they get the initial diagnosis. And in early intervention, we're often faced with parents who are in a really tough time of their life. Coping responses may include specific techniques to manage challenging behaviors or seeking out social support. And those are things that we need to do. This was research, I really like this research study because it says that midlife, this is looking at parents who are in midlife, and it says their mean age was 57.4, which I was glad to hear was midlife. When you're my age, you're glad for any bone that's thrown to you. I thought I was old, and now I'm in midlife. These were midlife parents of children with disabilities, and the parents of children with disabilities were compared to a control group. And they found that they used their time in similar ways, and they had similar positive events in their life, that it wasn't that their lives were terrible, that they really had a lot of positive things. But the parents of the children with disabilities really had daily elevated levels of stress, negative affect, and physical symptoms. And the afternoon and evening groups the afternoon and evening cortisol had lower decline in the disability parent group. So we started to see that flattening out. Remember, we talked about cortisol can either be, the curve can either be hyper or hypo, and neither is good. These had a more flattened pattern. The more time they spent with the children, the higher was their level of negative affect, but they had fewer physical symptoms. They didn't perceive that they felt as bad. They had a marginally less pronounced daily decline of cortisol with increased time spent with their child. So it was somewhat stressful to be with their kids, but that wasn't the total picture. This was another study looking at parents of adolescents and adults with autism spectrum disorder. And this one is really powerful in that they show that the mothers of children with ASD had significantly lower levels of cortisol throughout the day, akin to people with post-traumatic stress syndrome. It tells us that life may be so tough that they've turned off their stress response. They're no longer really even able to mount it. They found that for the mothers in the study whose children had infrequent behavior problems, there was a large rise in their morning cortisol the day after the problem behavior occurred. And so they mounted a higher stress response after a problem behavior occurred if it was a rarity. If it didn't happen frequently, if their child had a meltdown once a month, they were temporarily more stressed. But for the mothers whose children had clinically significant behaviors all the time, day in and day out, the bad behaviors didn't even result in increased AM cortisol, that they were staying low because it was just such an expected event that they could no longer mount a stress response to that. Yeah, I'm going to skip over this video. You've got the link to it, and I'm going to let you watch it on your own after. It's a mother of a child with autism, and she talks about a lot of this research and just how parents need to take care of themselves, how important it is. And it gives lots of nice strategies for parents to help themselves, which obviously, as we watch it, it gives us strategies to help parents to help themselves. But they really do. Our parents need to learn how to take care of themselves, that they're so good and they work so hard with their kids that it can be a very, very tough thing. One of the things she brings out from the research, she brings out the PTSD study, but also that the mothers who work are interrupted at work more than twice as often when they have a child with autism. So they're just kind of those day in and day out things. So we really have to think that our parents need our they're under long-term stress, and there's a lot of long-term impact, and they really need our understanding, our support. We really have to help them understand their kids. We have to help them with those challenging behaviors, give them strategies to deal with it, help them identify their resources, but then also let them feel that they're in charge. I was a family consultant with kids with disabilities, and I was really good at my job, if I do say so myself. That I was really good at helping. Basically, I identified resources for them. I put in place a million things, and the mom said to me, she said, "I don't know what we would do without you. You are so wonderful." And I just kind of polished off my little medal, and I felt so good about myself. And it really stroked my ego enormously. And then this was a grant-funded project. It ended. And for a while, the mom kept calling me, and I thought, oh, that's nice. And then, it kind of didn't get to be so nice, and I kind of faded that out. Well, things really fell apart big time for that family because I really hadn't given them control. I was doing for them. They were donors. The same things, everything the same applies for kids, families, and us. It's all the same. Addressing, and I'm hurrying, addressing the stressors affecting a child requires addressing the stressors on his or her family in order to ensure that the critical environment of relationships can be maximally supportive. We've got to address the whole family. We can't just intervene with children. And unfortunately, you're going to have to think on this one, on yourself, of how can you support your families. That we really do have to think of that whole system. And I am going to have you go quickly to this link, and this is another one from that same This Emotional Life. It's Dr. Robert Sapolsky again, because he's so entertaining. And just go ahead and click on it, and then again, raise your hands when you're done, and then we just have a couple more slides, and we'll be finished. So go ahead and click. Okay, I'm seeing most of your hands up, and I'm hoping that the others will come back quickly, and I'm hoping you can hear me. And just to kind of finish up what you can do to control your own stress. I'm going to skip those activities. But addressing those stressors in your life. What's making you stressed? Can you reduce it? Getting a healthful diet. Don't just eat junk food all the time. It really is going to raise your cortisol levels. Get enough sleep. And it's not enough to sleep just intermittently throughout the day. It has to be a sustained length of time. Get good quality sleep. Exercise, but make sure that you exercise regularly, and it's something that you like. If you're doing something you hate, it's not really going to help you, and it doesn't help to do it once a month as much as I would love it to do it that way. Practice relaxation techniques. Do the deep breathing. Go back to your Lamaze training, you and all who had kids. Do yoga. Do whatever it takes to relax, whatever you need to do, even veg out in front of the TV, if that's how you relax. Foster relationships. You need that social support. Foster those positive ones. Be with people that you enjoy being with. Have a sense of humor. Laughter truly is the best medicine. And then seek counseling if and when it is needed. The research has shown that just taking that first step and calling a therapist, calling someone for help reduces your stress even before you've even actually gone there and done it. And if all those things don't work, there's your stress reduction. Questions? Here's one. If your cortisol levels stay low because you've turned off your stress response, can this change? Yes and no. It depends on how long that's been going on. The brain there's a lot of plasticity in the brain, and sometimes there can be a recovery if there's not been a lot of damage. The hippocampus does have the ability to even recover some of itself, but if there's too much damage, it can't do it. And so if that hippocampus is too damaged, it actually shrinks in size, and so it really isn't able to turn off that. It isn't able to recoup itself, and they've shown that in some individuals with PTSD, that's the problem, is their hippocampus is smaller, and they don't know if it was smaller and that's why they got post-traumatic stress syndrome, because obviously you can't do a randomized control test on that and measure people and then give them a traumatic stress event. So, yes and no. I mean, there is a lot of plasticity, and so it does help. Good. I will do that. Are there any other questions about how you can manage your own stress? Really we have to, and you as teachers really do have to look at your own stress. I really want to do, from my own research, the next thing I want to do is really look at stress levels of teachers. Nobody's looked at that, and I think especially teachers of kids with challenging behaviors, that some of my students who are also teachers come with, wounds. They've been bitten, they've been hit. They are undergoing a lot of stress day in and day out, and I think we need to start looking really at how we can support and help teachers more as well. But really do think of all of those things, and as Robert Sapolsky said, the main thing is that you do them and do them regularly. There's no right way. And also be very flexible in your approach. That he brings up a lot is that there's no one right way, that every different stressful situation requires a different coping strategy. And you have to figure out what's the best one for you that moment, that day, and that stressor. There unfortunately are no magic bullets. You all have been absolutely wonderful. I never, ever thought I'd go over time. I assured Robin I'd never be able to fill this up. And I really appreciate you all for hanging with it and you all for participating so much. And take care and manage your stress.
Thanks, Kathy. And this is Terry from the Clearinghouse. On behalf of Robin, we just want to send out a big thank you to Kathy for sharing this wonderful information with us. And a thank you to all of you for participating in this last session. We would love to have your feedback, so just a reminder about completing the evaluation survey for us. And for the upcoming academic year, webinar series are currently being discussed and planned. So just check the Idaho Training Clearinghouse, so idahotc.com, and we'll have information there when we get those things. So we're hoping to have the whole year planned out to announce so that you can plan accordingly. So again, thanks everyone, and have a good evening.